Whenever I get home from a trip like this, friends are curious to hear how it went. Of course, they will be curious, and we know why, right? Here's what I am telling them. From 2000 to 2019 or so, Ethiopia and Nigeria led the way on dramatic improvement in health and poverty that rippled across sub-Saharan Africa. Since then, the pandemic, extreme weather, and political economic instability have set both countries back alongside with much of the rest of the continent. Take note of the narrative. It is very important. I'm going to come back to this later.
Pan-African lifestyle.
Welcome to Pan-African Lifestyle, where we rep the motherland. We post content regularly and invite you to subscribe and share. If you're a pal, that's a Pan-African Lifestyler.
So we all have heard the news that Mr. Bill Gates has been touring Africa. Precisely, he has been to Ethiopia and Nigeria. And those of you in Nigeria, you know the message that he brought to Nigeria. And those of you in these two countries, you probably heard the message that he brought to these countries. But what is it that Mr. Bill Gates is saying about his trip to Africa? I am on a website called Gates Notes. Let's read together. 2 countries, 5 days. Highlight of my trip to Nigeria and Ethiopia by Bill Gates, September 5th, 2024. Now let's read it together. I have just wrapped up a busy 5-day trip to Ethiopia and Nigeria. It's a kind of trip that's both tiring and energizing at the same time. Even though I stay in touch with a lot of partners in both countries, the Gates Foundation has been funding work in them for more than 15 years. There is nothing quite like visiting to see the work in action. Whenever I get home from a trip like this, friends are curious to hear how it went. Of course, they will be curious, and we know why, right? Here's what I am telling them. From 2000 to 2019 or so, Ethiopia and Nigeria led the way on dramatic improvement in health and poverty that rippled across sub-Saharan Africa. Since then, the pandemic, extreme weather, and political economic instability have set both countries back alongside with much of the rest of the continent. Take note of the narrative. It is very important. I'm going to come back to this later. But as I saw on this trip, there is great work going on in both places that makes me optimistic about their future and Africa's. Their future and Africa's. This is Mr. Bill Gates. Thanks to everyone who shared their time and insights with me, including Prime Minister Ahmed of Ethiopia, Nigeria Health Minister Mohammed Ali Pate, and a special guest who came along for the trip, the amazing musician John Batiste. The foundation will be working with African partners even more in the future. Oh my God. The foundation will be working more with African partners even more in the future. And based on what I saw this week, my next visit will be just as inspiring. And you can go on that website and see some of the pictures that he's sharing. The article continues. I arrived in Addis Ababa on Sunday, and on Monday morning, I took a 2-hour car ride with Prime Minister Ahmed to visit a cluster of wheat farms in Oromia region. On the way, we talked about a lot of different topics, including healthcare and the economy. But we probably spent most of the time discussing the country's amazing gains in agriculture, and the Prime Minister spoke with particular pride about one big accomplishment. Ethiopia no longer needs to import any wheat. It grows all on its own. People, this is GMO. Listen to the topics of Mr. Gates' conversation. They're all centered around healthcare, about food production. Please take note of Mr. Gates' topics of discussion. They're all centered around agriculture. They're centered around people. They're centered around food. And we know what factor this plays in his depopulation agenda, right? The article continues. The farm cluster we visited is a great example of how they are doing it. 3 years ago, the fields there weren't farmed at all. Today, nearly 2,400 farmers there are working almost 100,000 acres of wheat. And they are using innovative approaches to get the most out of the land. Among other things, they have adopted new varieties of wheat that resist diseases and tolerate extreme weather. They have also created early warning systems that can detect and stop crops diseases before they spread widely. Now, this is the language that is used to let us understand that they're talking about GMO. If they have introduced a new variety of wheat and they're using this, what he calls innovative techniques, this is just telling us bluntly that he's referring to GMO. And if he's visiting these farms, it's because there must be GMO farms. I may be wrong, but I don't think that Mr. Gates is going to visit any farm that produces organic food, because he doesn't stand for organic food. He doesn't. And I will let you go read the rest of the article. That article, there are pictures of him standing with some African people. And what I want to focus on is this. The fact that someone who has no expertise on agriculture. Look, Mr. Bill Gates is a university dropout. Not that I have anything against university dropouts, but his expertise is in technology. How come this person has become the world's expert on agriculture when he didn't study agriculture, when he himself is not a farmer? How come he's become an expert on our health and the countries of the world trust him when he did not study medicine? How come he's become an expert in viruses and vaccines when he is not a virologist? I don't know that he studied virology. How come he's become the authority in other healthcare services when he did not study medicine? How come he is an expert in African affairs when he didn't even do African studies? And if he did, they would be based on what his ancestors have written about Africa. It will not be based on what Africa is and who Africans are. And so what I'm trying to say here is that we got to be very careful about this person visiting Africa, and we got to be very careful and listen to the language that he uses when it comes to bringing his programs to Africa. It is no secret, he says it publicly, that African population needs to be reduced, and he has been around for a long time. More and more of the atrocities that he has committed using his vaccines are coming out. We know that he has his hands in almost every pharmaceutical industry that exists on this planet. We know that he has his hands on any food industry around. And so combine food poisoning and vaccines and pharmacy, and then you see what is making this guy rich. Have you asked yourself why Mr. Bill Gates' wealth has more than tripled ever since he quit Microsoft and became a philanthropist? How can the wealth of a philanthropist skyrocket in times of crisis? Now you tell me. Africans, wake up. Wake up. Read between the lines. There is so much information out there. We need to teach ourselves how to find, read, and understand some of this information, because we can't afford to be lazy, we can't afford to be passive, and we can't afford to be ignorant. We can't afford to be fooled again. Not on our watch. Wake up.
Thanks for tuning into Pan-African Lifestyle. Share your thoughts in the comments section and follow us on TikTok and Instagram at Pan-African Lifestyle to be inspired. For awesome PAL merch, check out panafricanlifestyle.com/shop. Keep repping the motherland.
Pan-African lifestyle.